Next up, we have a fireside chat on the topic, have Copcom and PR firms geared up to deal with the new news? We will be joined by the speakers, Smitha Verma, independent journalist, in conversation with Arpan Basu, Director Communications, Coca-Cola India and Southwest Asia, and Binesh Kutty, Senior Director Live, Newsroom GBM. The stage is over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Roshni. Hi, Binesh, and hi, Arpan. We can't see your video, Arpan. Will you please switch on?
I'm just trying to. However, it says.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Lovely, lovely,
Clear.
lovely.
Loud and clear. So yeah, thanks, Binesh and Arpan. So we are here to have a fireside chat on technology in newsrooms. Now that's a very vast topic, and we can have the entire day talking about this. But let's just stick to a few main points, how things have changed in this, especially in the last year, the pandemic year. Technology has really reshaped newsrooms, the way we work. All of us work, not just newsrooms and communications and agencies. So I'll start with you, Binesh. What is the difference that you've seen? We know everyone is a content creator now. Everyone can produce content. There are multiple platforms to disseminate that content. So what is the change that you've seen in the last 1 year, especially?
So from a live newsroom perspective, which we have set up at Genesis BCW since the past almost close to a decade now, the change has been
louder. I can't.
Am I audible now? Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. So from a live newsroom
better.
perspective, which we have set up at Genesis BCW since over nearly a decade now. So I have been spotting these changes since the past 10 years, at least from this industry's point of view. So when you talk about content creation and the explosion of content creators itself, the change that we have had to adapt to has been in identifying these content creators and the platforms that they exist on. So the technologies that have emerged over the past 1 year, if you're asking, is that, for example, there is predictive analytics that has come alive in the past 1 year, through which we are able to scour through the internet as to the user's interest. What are the content that the users are consuming? So that we can create relevant news specs for the client, so that the client's messaging requirements also is met, as well as it is topical enough for the journalists, right? Another thing that we have seen emerge in the past 1 year is identifying influencers, right? So influencers, it's also the TG of the influencers, right? So we have tools in place which will not only let you identify, the traditional male and female as a gender, but we also have tools in place which can now also cater to the requirement of diversity and inclusion, where we will have to target the non-binary target group. So technologies are placed in that for that as well, right? So these are a couple of changes that we have noticed in the past 1 year.
Yeah, as you mentioned, influencers and journalists. Yeah, influencers have become a really important group now, and there's always a debate about how much of actual influence and who are the influencers whom you should reach out to. So, from a brand's perspective, Arpan, what do you think in the new setup of media? We have moved from the traditional media. There's a social media. There are chat groups. There are messaging platforms. There are influencers. There are all sorts of things that are happening. For a brand in such a scenario, how do you identify whether this story should go out to an influencer, to a journalist, or is there no such demarcation now?
Well, before that, Smitha, let me just touch upon a few things before I get onto that.
Yeah.
First things first, can we be ready for the ever-changing world? I have my serious doubts. Can we ever be ready? I don't know, because you see the external environment and the consumption trends change so quickly and rapidly that to stay ahead of the curve is a challenge in itself. Okay. However, some people do manage to at least be with the curve rather than stay ahead of the curve. Now, what has changed in the last couple of months, or let's say a year, especially because everybody and everything is now coming down to COVID and life before COVID and life after COVID. You see, these consumption trends in consumers, they were already sort of bubbling. Okay, with COVID, what has happened is that all of this, the change has become more rapid and more visible. It has got accentuated. So if you were talking about digital media, was it not there before COVID? Yes, it was there before COVID. The consumption trends, however, have evolved, have changed. A lot of times from beginning of the COVID to the end of the COVID, and I've seen this transition for myself. And when I talk about myself, I talk about personally. We used to watch TV. Now I'm looking at a personal screen. So that's a remarkable change, and that gives you a lot of leeway as to how communicators can sort of play out content. Having said that, there is also a very little, um, what do I say, I mean, the lines between communications and marketing is also blurring. How do you differentiate between marketing and communication on a platform like social media? Can you really differentiate, or will both of these people work together to come to a common sort of a solution? I think the networked way of working is becoming more and more relevant. So what is the content that one needs to send out is not really dictated by what I want to say. It is a mix of what I want to say and what the consumer wants to hear. You may want to play whatever you want to play as a communicator, but unless that content is getting consumed, or if it is not catchy enough or not interesting enough for the consumer, will you cut ice any with that content? Not really. I think you need to first analyze what is it that the consumer is seeking, mix it with what the company or what the corporate message is or what the brand message is, make a nice cocktail out of the two and put it out and make it interesting enough so that it becomes consumable. Possibly take up a socially relevant cause. And there are multiple things that one can debate and debate until the cows come home, but it's really no one thing that you can pick out, pull out, or segregate. It's a mixture of many things, and that is what the dynamic situation today is like.
And Smitha, if I were to add to what Arpan was saying about readiness of the industry, a couple of points, I'll take just 1 minute. So for example, PRCA as an industry body organizes a lot of training programs, a lot of master classes, so that we are with the times in terms of technology adoption, as well as translating that in for our clients, right? At Genesis BCW, we are very, very focused on learning and development. We have learning and some training session or the other every 2 or 3 days over here, right? And also to take the technology and to be ahead of the curve, companies do invest in a lot of new technologies. For example, here at the live newsroom, we do have an application in place, which is a web-based, iOS-based, Android-based application, which has human intelligence layer attached to it. So for example, if you're engaging with an influencer, we would also want to capitalize the existing relationship that is there in the firm. So we are 300 people strong. Someone or the other has interacted with an influencer, knows the disposition of the influencer, right? And you have to make that right connect, whether it's an influencer, whether it is a journalist or a media person, right? So from that perspective, we have put this application in place since the past 5 years now, and it is perpetually a beta. Like Arpan said, it is difficult to keep up with time. So all that we can do is to invest time, effort, energy to keep evolving as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, even for media houses now, it's a two-way engagement. It's no longer like a one-way engagement. You're bringing out a newspaper and probably you will get a feedback many days later in a one-off letter to the editor. Now, in real time, the engagement is happening with the audience. As the news is breaking, you are writing, editing, uploading, you're using all that technology is offering you. And in fact, you're even identifying with what your reader wants to read. So, it could be something which is very global or maybe a very local story. You have to identify the target audience, as Arpan said, and as you're rightly saying, Binesh. What we have to see is what ultimately we are all catering, be it the communications, influencer, journalist, agency, whosoever it is, you're all sending out a message here. And how the message is consumed is how technology helps us in identifying who is consuming it, what is being consumed, and all those things. So, Arpan, if I were to ask you from a brand perspective, where does ROI, how do you figure out ROI in this whole scenario?
That's the most difficult question, or perhaps the most confusing answer I'll ever give you. But jokes aside, as communicators, we are here to work on the reputations. Now, reputation in its true sense is very difficult to measure. And whether it is the right measurement or not, again, it's subject to discussion, argument, debate, etc. But there are multiple things that one does. I think from when social media was launched to the likes and the comments, and I think we've moved way beyond that. I think there are studies that are there in the market. For example, we follow something called a reputation action study, which is done across markets, and it benchmarks you against your previous to now, and it takes into account various sort of vectors of measurement. For example, what social good we are doing, what is it that people are talking about us, what do they remember of us, and multiple other things. That's one way to look at it. The other way is, of course, what all the measurement agencies possibly provide you with. Now, they are also effective, but none of these are. I can't. If you tell me to put my hand on my heart and say, are they completely conclusive? Well, we don't know. But at least they give you some sort of direction, and the direction in most of the times is good enough to work with going forward and sort of position yourself for the future.
Right.
Yeah, and if
As a journalist, yeah, are you saying something, Dinesh?
Yeah. So I just wanted to add on top of what Arpan is saying. I do completely agree with Arpan that it is a very difficult place to be at when we talk about measurement. From a comms perspective, we are trying to measure the messaging, right? But at the end of the day, there is money being spent. So there are brands which do want to evaluate ROI, which kind of brings in both the elements, the money spent as well as the messaging delivered. So this is a very bespoke thing that has to be made, right? It differs from brand to brand. So for example, we have created an ROI measurement dashboard for a beauty brand based out of China, right? Wherein the platforms are completely different, right? It's not your Twitter and Instagram. They have their own set of platforms. The language is completely different, but then ultimately, end of the day, it is data, right? So from a messaging perspective, as well as from the money spent perspective, we were able to, along with the brand, create an ROI dashboard which measures both the messaging as well as the money spent, and make more bang out of the buck, right? So that you can change your tactics if required, tweak your campaigns if required, almost on a real-time basis, right? But yeah, like Arpan said, it is something that there is no one size fits all measurement thing in place.
Yeah, I guess it's true for us. Our stories also, what we write or what we create, we really don't know how much of it is being of value to whom. You have a certain idea. I mean, for us also, that's a way, the user engagement is one way of measuring how we are doing out there, and tech has really helped us in that. As a journalist, I'm very curious to know from both of you. I'm coming to a little more personal side of it. Now there are social media handles. We have all your more or less you can understand a person's personality if you go through the social media profiles, if you see what they have been talking about. So do you ever sell your pictures or product or the brand using the personality of using the social media, and to having understood the personality of the journalist over there? It's to
Are
both of
you
you.
okay? Why don't you go first, Binesh? Because I think
Sure.
you guys front end that bit.
Sure, sure. Smitha, what you're talking about is, do we try to understand the audience that we are trying to reach out to? Yes, we do.
Not just audience, the messenger.
The messenger as well, correct. So I would say either the media or the influencer would be
Yeah.
the messenger,
Yeah.
and the consumer is ultimately the receiver of it, right? Do we try to understand the patterns? Yeah, of course. So anything that is there in the public domain, see, that is the beauty of data, right? So anything that you put out on the public domain, which is not shared in a closed group or in a private profile, is available for technology to ingest and to give insights. So is there a mechanism in place where we can figure out what is your tastes, right? What is the kind of content that you would like to consume? What is the like of content that you would like to engage? It is very much possible to figure that out, because it is all there in the public domain, and you are putting it in the public domain because you want to make it very clear that this is who I am, right? Either as a journalist or an influencer or
Absolutely.
as a consumer, right? And it is our responsibility to tweak our messaging in such a way that it kind of resonates with you as a journalist or an influencer and you as a consumer of the content. That is what I would want to share over here.
Okay, this brings back to what I said in my first comment. Actually, it's not about what you want to say. It's about what the other person wants to hear also. So are you using these platforms to understand what the other person wants to hear, and therefore customizing your approach of communication? Yes, of course. And you have to appreciate the fact that the world has, or this whole journalism world has gone through a massive change. What has happened? Earlier we used to have one set of stakeholders, right? We used to have the journalists whom we used to sort of convince or try to pitch a story, sell a story, etc. Now every single person is a journalist. The spectrum for me is much wider. So do I have to understand what these guys want to listen to? What is it that they want to talk about? How do they consume content? What is it that is relevant to them? Of course I need to understand, because only then will I be able to customize my messaging to use them effectively to carry my message forward. It's as simple. I think it from becoming a one-way street, it has now become a two-way street, and it's a joint effort. That's where we are, I think, in all of this right now. And going forward, I think this will only increase. You see, today journalism on Twitter is very high. Today, most journalists, they also have a Twitter handle. They also have a Facebook page. They also have Instagram handles. And you will notice that every time they file a story, they also tweet about it. So do I want to understand what the journalist is interested in? What is the story? What is it that they're covering? Yes, of course I am.
Before filing we tweet, if it's breaking news, one tweets first and then files the story. So yeah, you have to be right out there, breaking news. And that also brings, even tech has its disadvantages also, because often what happens is you don't get into the fact checking. In the rush to break news on Twitter, most of us would just announce it and then later fact check, and it so often happens. And I'm sure you would have come across, as an agency, Binesh, something you might have come across which would have been really a very minor issue, would have blown out of proportion just because someone didn't fact check or didn't reach out to the agency before breaking the news. Tech has its disadvantages, and how have you tackled that, like, in this
So
era of two-way communication?
so Smita, it's there is no generic answer to this, and in terms of examples, there are like tens of examples per day, right? And I would like to just tell you how do we tackle it, rather than the examples of like issue blowing up out of proportion. So and how does technology come into play, right? It's not necessarily new technologies that you have to put in place to tackle these things. Like, for example, if there is some image of some brand that is floating around on WhatsApp, right? And this is an example that I'm citing of a brand that faced a challenge, right? There was a WhatsApp image that was floating around, and the question from the brand was that, how do we find out where was this published and who's the publisher of this, because we want to tackle this, right? So something as simple as a reverse image search on Google helps out with that. In terms of some photograph of a client that is floating around, and one is trying to figure out where was this taken, and how many such photos exist of this particular event, right? So you can make use of the image search on something like a Yandex, which is another search engine, right? So these are existing technologies in place, and then there are new technologies and evolving technologies, the listening tools that we have in place, which will help us monitor all of these things, specific keywords and generic keywords, so that we are on top of things. And these are things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And our job is to ensure that the journalists get the right information. That is something that we are a curator of. So it's very, very, very unlikely that you will get something that is not fact checked or not verified from our side of the industry. And we do help the larger set of the community by educating them as to how to tackle such problems.
Right. Since we're talking about technology, I think one of the digital, everything's fine, web is going on, TV is going on, all of that is there. What about podcasts? Arpan, especially, I would like to know from you, the consumption has grown, definitely it has grown in the last 1 year, it has picked up really well in globally as well as in India. But still, I feel maybe I may be wrong here that advertisers are still shy of using that platform. And mainstream media publications, traditional media setups have all started their own podcasts also, but still it somehow seems to not have grown the way it should have. Why is that so?
I completely agree with you that podcasts have increased, and it's such a, I'll tell you the reason. At least my understanding is that there was some bit of fatigue which set in with consumption of content through the visual medium, because when the pandemic hit us, we very easily transitioned to working from home. And while you were working from home, you were spending the entire day in front of your laptop, so you were doing your multiple meetings on the laptop. And then by the end of it, because you couldn't go out, you couldn't do anything else, you were also looking at your devices. So about 18 hours in a day, I can at least speak for myself,
All
we
of
were
us,
glued to a screen, all of us.
space, everything was our laptop or the
Right.
smartphone.
Or
Yeah.
the phone or the iPad or whatever you may have. After a point, you said, what the hell? I can't do this anymore. At least let me shut my eyes, give it some rest, and I can listen. You know, you can't shut your eyes and see, but you can shut your eyes and listen still. So I think the whole concept of podcast sort of picked up from there. In fact, very interestingly, last year we had a nice podcast with our then marketing head, Vijay Parsuraman, and he spoke about the changing trends of marketing and what pandemic brings and all of that. But perhaps you'll have to give a little more time for change. See, change in a lot of scenarios is abrupt, but change in a lot of other scenarios a little more gradual. So you may have to perhaps give a little bit of time for new concepts to set in, because as consumers, we are not always accepting of change. We are a little averse of change. We don't want to. That's human nature, right? You're so set in your ways that you want to keep doing something that you're doing and you're seeing that it's giving you good results. So why change? By the time you realize that this change is perhaps more effective than what you were doing earlier, you will perhaps be more open to sort of trying out change. So you'll have to probably give it some time, and some more data for marketers and communicators to believe that investing in newer methods, newer channels will give them the desired results that they're looking for.
So Smitha, if I were to just take 1 minute to just add on
Yeah,
top of
sure.
the question that you had, see, I have been a consumer of podcasts since the year 2007, 2008. Podcasts have been around for a long time, right? And podcasts have not been able to monetize themselves the way that the potential that it holds. And it is in 2020 that you saw a real big upswing of podcast. Having said that, as consumer, as publishers, you want to monetize it, but the change won't happen immediately, right? It's only now that you have gotten exposed to it, right? So like Arpan said, you will have to give it time. It has been close to 10, 12 years that podcast exists, right? It is just now that we have started, using podcasts. Similar parallel would be that of QR codes. QR codes as a technology has existed since the 1990s, right? It is only now that you have the,
Pandemic
wallets.
actually to get
Yeah,
into QR
now
code.
that you have digital payments going up,
Yeah,
that the adoption of QR code is actually coming alive, right? So
yeah.
you have to give it time, because when people start accepting it is when you can start actually monetizing it, to your question.
In fact, now that restaurants have started, they don't have the menu. So many of them, you have to
Correct.
scan the code. So it has become more everyday usage. So
Yes.
that's so it's pretty sad in a way that podcasts haven't they should have grown, because it's ultimately branching out of radio only. What else would that be? Podcast. So
Correct.
yeah, there. So another thing, since we are talking about technology, I think we just have 4 5 minutes with us. One quick thing I would like to ask both of you, and in fact it helps me a lot also, is data. Whenever you are doing something, you do a lot of data analysis. You need to have the numbers. You can't anymore escape away from not having your numbers in place, and analyzing them to send out the message. So how has or data journalists, how have they helped agency or a brand to send out the message?
Arpan?
Why don't you go, Binesh, first? I can
Okay.
add to you.
Okay. So data is bread and butter for us, and for us, whenever we create messaging, right, it has to be evidence based. So there is a rationale that we have when we craft the message, and data also helps in identifying which set of audience to go through, which set of audience to reach out to. And data, without data, it is difficult to add legs to the ideas that you have. So without data, it's just difficult to get your messaging across. Data is everything, and for us at the live newsroom, data is useful for solving any problem. So what we say at the newsroom is that do not come and say, I have a problem that I want you to solve a particular way. Tell us what the problem is, and what we do is we take data to solve that problem. So I would say data is everything.
Precisely. I think, when they say data is the new oil, they say it for a reason. You see, in a very simple way, data allows you to bring science into the art. Communication at the end of the day is a combination. I mean, essentially, it's an art how you do it. But data is what allows you to bring science to it, to help you identify where, how, what, when, all of that.
Right, right. And have newsrooms adapted to the change well? I would like to hear it from the other side. How have we been doing on that note?
I think they have, I think they have. And in a very nice, accepting and a large way. See, we have within our company, we have something called Samvad, which is the data center for us. It's in-house for us, and we measure everything that gets communicated, the impact of it, um, the the effectiveness of it, etc. Everything is mentioned there. I think you know the way we've been able to integrate social media to traditional, or new age digital ways of communication to the old traditional ways of communicating, and digital and print media together. I think it just goes to say that we've been using data pretty well, and I think every big company in today's day and age has been using data in a nice and meaningful way.
Right. What I ask, when we're talking about technology, it's obviously a two-way street between communicators and the and journalists. How we do how we work, how we go forward together. So I just wanted to know from both of you. In fact, just this would be my last question, and you can ask me if there is anything that you would like to know from this side of the world. So, how has technology helped you in reaching out to the messenger, the journalist, the influencer, whosoever it is?
So from a journalist perspective, Smitha, you would appreciate that you want facts and figures, right? And from a data perspective, that is what we are able to churn out on a day-to-day basis. So we
Right.
also come to you with facts and figures. So that is how things have become much more approachable, because data allows us to give you what you want, and in a factual and in a proper way, right? So I think it is going good. We are working in tandem with each other, and it will only get better as the time goes on.
I'm sure it will get better.
See, I'll to very simply answer this question. Can you imagine a world today where you take data out and try to communicate? Perhaps not, right? So that is the essence of data. Can you imagine a world void of data? We can't. I think data, like I said, helps you bring science into the art. And I think that is the importance and the essence of data. It has become such a strong pillar of communication that one cannot imagine communicating without it anymore.
That's a nice line. I'm going to copy it and use it. Data brings science into the art. Yeah, that's quite nice. And also it helps journalists also to send out their stories, and the users also, the credibility attached to a story goes is so much higher when you have figures and facts to support it, and technology really makes it easier. All the tools, ML, AI, whatever, all of that is there, it really helps. So I think we have, yeah, it's our half an hour is over. I had a great time. I got to know a little bit more about from the other side how I can work better and how we can communicate with each other in a better manner. Thanks so much. Thank you, Binesh, and
Thank you,
thanks,
Smitha.
Arpan.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Arpan.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed ourselves as well. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for being a part of this
Bye-bye.
event.
Thank you. Bye.
Our next session